and then it was eerily quiet. And then my mind was kind of like, you know, the head in the fishbowl.
Then it takes me into the bathroom and says, this is how you brush your teeth. Brush, rinse, repeat. Brush, rinse, repeat. Brush, rinse, repeat.
But there were two girls, and it was like, you'll have to give us a ride. You can't tell us no. You can't refuse us. He'll let us in his car.
The thoughts were all alone in this empty void, you know, the head in the fishbowl.
This doesn't look right. They got close enough where he said he could see, you know, their eyes and how intelligent they seem. This doesn't look right. These gremlin-type creatures. This doesn't look right. No pupils, no iris. 3 fingers. 3 long fingers. And this is when the mental torture.
And then it was eerily quiet.
Welcome back to Conspirinormal, folks. It's your host, Adam. And on the ones and twos is producer Rob. Been battling the squirrels all week.
Hello, everybody. Damn squirrels.
That's right. We got a story about the squirrels. We'll
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about how your dog is the
Yeah, my
is
dog
the
earned a
hero
new
of the
title.
hour.
Yeah, she is now known as the Squirrel Slayer. Protecting the studio. Bless her heart.
Right. And we got Sirfiel.
Yes, sir.
And man, a few words right now. He's over there smoking a stogie.
Yeah. Give my brewski on too.
And say hello, Joe. The mic's right there. You got to pull it towards yourself.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, yeah. He's got the mic like a rapper, man. Like, what's going on?
He's a cup that, you know?
He's cupping the mic over here. And we have the guest on the line because you've been hearing him laughing at us. Craig Ciccone. Craig, welcome
What's up, gentlemen?
Welcome back to Conspirinormal, sir.
Well, thanks so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be back with you guys.
Yeah,
and it's good to see that you know, the squirrel population control, because here in Michigan they've just okayed to let hunters, you know, take care of the deer population because it's overpopulated. So is that what you do down there? You let dogs run loose and kill all the squirrels?
Only the ones that chew through my electrical lines.
Yeah,
fair enough.
And the internet lines.
And the internet lines.
Yeah, there you go.
See, we'd been having problems with. Well, not in the last 2 shows. The last 2 shows we've been fine. So knock on wood, we're fine this show.
I don't know why it's working. It's like magic that we have internet right now.
Yeah, it's like hanging on by a thread.
Yeah, the cable line going out the wall is literally, there's one little tiny piece of copper that's 4 inches long holding the cable together.
That's a powerful piece of copper.
Absolutely.
They're bionic, weaponized Illuminati squirrels trying to shut us up.
So
what else on Conspirinormal, right?
Exactly. They know that they don't want us. They've sent the squirrels in here to silence us. Is what it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sleeper cell squirrels.
Yeah. So his dog killed the squirrel.
Deep state squirrels. Dude.
Yeah.
Jeez.
The deep states.
We need some fan
after
art,
us.
everybody. Send us some fan art of the deep state squirrels.
Absolutely.
Squirrels in black.
What a deep squid squirrel looks like, yeah.
So, reason we've got you on, and I thought about doing this because I realized that this year is the 50th anniversary of not one but 2 assassinations. And
right.
2 very important assassinations. We've already passed one of those milestones, which was April 4th of this year. April 4th, 1968 being the assassination of Martin Luther King. And then we're coming up on next month now, June the 5th of 1968 was when it happened, was the assassination of RFK. So
right.
We didn't get too far. I think the first show that we had you on, we talked about assassinations of the 1960s, but we more talked
right.
about like Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, Fred Hampton, some more kind of like, I guess you could say, a little bit more minor events that weren't as well known at the time.
Exactly.
These, you know, of course, JFK and RFK, MLK. These are kind of like the trinity of the assassinations of the 60s. So
Absolutely.
here we are on 50 years later. And we had you
Right.
on earlier as well about last year. We had you on about Vietnam a little bit, talking about the documentary. And again, the reason I thought about having you on was I watched a documentary on the Martin Luther King assassination. This was
Right.
from PBS American Experience. It was called, I think, something like Road to Memphis.
Road to Memphis.
I think is
Yep.
what it was called. So there's some madness going on.
Yeah, that's my dog and his attitude towards squirrels.
So we talked about that, and so I just kind of want to get your first of all, let's kind of get your thoughts on that, about that particular documentary, about whether there was it historical, was it accurate? How did you feel about it?
Well, like I said, I use the term documentary quite loosely because it really wasn't a documentary. It was almost a feel-good piece about, and less than an hour long too, to cover the quote-unquote assassination. But taking as given that James Earl Ray was the assassin, so it presupposes that, and that's the narrative that they use. And so when you ask whether it was historically accurate, it was, at least in the minds of the people who were interviewed. And of course, you'll notice that nobody of any real import, with the exception of James Earl Ray's first lawyer, no one was interviewed. Now, to give credit to PBS, the reason that they weren't interviewed is, well, they're all dead. Mark Lane, Harold Weisberg, James Earl Ray himself, Dick Gregory, these, the pioneers of opening up this case and getting it reinvestigated in the late 1970s.
Yeah, Gregory died last year.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but William Pepper, who has made a name for himself writing 3 books on his experiences being Ray's lawyer and trying to get a new trial for Ray before he died, his health concerns, Ray's health issues, he needed a liver transplant. And so his declining health was one of the impetuses for trying to get a new investigation opened before he died. And that was when you saw Martin Luther King III, who looked so eerily like his father, met Ray in prison and had an interview on CNN face to face. Here's the victim's son with the accused assassin face to face. And where he's asking him point blank, did you kill my father? And he said no. But none of these people, William Pepper wasn't interviewed. Unfortunately, Ray's other brothers, 2 other brothers, Jerry and the other one escapes me now. They have subsequently died. So not too many people around that could vouch for Ray, or at the very least bring many of the inconsistencies and problems with the government's case against Ray to light. So it was a very one-sided. Anytime you see Gerald Posner interviewed as the expert, you know that something's awry, because he did a one-off book on the King assassination, and unsurprisingly, concluded that Ray did it and did it alone.
Yeah, he basically just supports the official story every time.
Exactly. So the documentary, it sounds, it sounds very authentic, because you've got people who have been studying it and who've written books on the case, or at least on Ray, talking as if they knew the man. Of course, none of them ever met or knew who Ray was, but made him out to be this perverted. And when I say perverted, I mean literally, sexually perverted, racist, that was more than willing to throw away his life in order to be paid $50,000 to kill King. So, unlike other documentaries that even are one-sided on the JFK assassination or the Robert Kennedy assassination or even Malcolm X, unlike those that at least uncover new documentary evidence, new photographic evidence, new even audio evidence, even those that find photographic films that we haven't seen before and restore them and digitize them and at least bring that to our attention. This didn't do that. This was just the towing the line, the government line, that Ray did this. And I guess one of the things that I want to dispel right away, because it seems to float around all of these assassinations, is apologists for the government or for the official reports of all of these murders is that we as a country can't wrap our heads around the fact that these civic political leaders, these people that we came to know and love and adore, we can't wrap our heads around the fact that they were taken from us so senselessly by these losers, these loners like Lee Harvey Oswald, Sirhan Sirhan, and James Earl Ray. And so the reason that we grasp onto conspiracy theories is because we can't just believe that it was the work of these lone, troubled individuals. And so we want to say that there was a bigger conspiracy, to make their victims, equal to their reputation. And I would argue that the whole reason that we have this bastion of researchers who have been studying it for, like you said, 50 years, is because don't these guys and everything that they did and everything that they sacrificed, isn't it a better memorial to them to make sure that, or to ask of their investigators that they don't botch it, that they don't destroy evidence, that they do a complete and thorough investigation? Don't they deserve at least that? Harold Weisberg pointed out that specifically on John Kennedy's autopsy, Lee Harvey Oswald, his accused assassin, got an autopsy that's worthy of a medical journal, while John Kennedy got an autopsy worthy of a Bowery bum, right?
Yeah.
So here's this assassin who gets the medical legal autopsy that is unscrappable and by a reputable forensic pathologist. And here, the president of the United States, who was murdered in front of his wife and in front of all these people, he couldn't even get an autopsy that would be admissible in court. So I say to those people, who say we have a knee-jerk reaction to just wanting a conspiracy as opposed to a lone nut. No, most of us simply want accountability, want transparency. We don't want the files and the photographs destroyed. We don't want, we want thorough investigations, because aren't these men that we're talking about worth it? And their sacrifice, wasn't that worth it? So all of that, to answer your question about the so-called documentary, there are much better documentaries out there if you want to know either about King himself or about the assassination.
Yeah, well,
because it really didn't touch on, because look, if you wanted to talk about the King assassination, then we would basically need a month, because what do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about the assassination itself and the evidence? Do you want to talk about the FBI's investigation into it? Do you want to talk about the fact that Ray wasn't apprehended like Oswald was a few hours later? He was apprehended 2 months later in a completely different country.
Right.
And then, his trial, or so-called trial, much like Sirhan Sirhan's, it wasn't an evidentiary trial. It was a trial for him to try to escape the death penalty. That was just like Sirhan Sirhan. So the defense, that is Ray's own lawyer, stipulated to the state's case. They didn't even argue the state's case in front of the jury. They said, look, we're going to stipulate that he did it. So let's just have this trial to make sure that my client doesn't go to the electric chair. And sure enough, by pleading guilty, Ray avoided the electric chair.
Yeah.
It was the same thing with Sirhan Sirhan. On the advice of really shady lawyers, admitted guilt to something they didn't do in order to save their own lives. Do you want to talk about the task force, the FBI task force that investigated in 1977, or then the House Select Committee on Assassinations that investigated King's assassination in 1977, 1978, 1979? There's just so much about this case that could be talked about. that is pretty daunting. But we'll go with specifics, as we go along.
Yeah, we'll talk it to keep it simple because we don't really have months. Because you're honestly right, because you could go forever with this stuff because that's how deep all this stuff goes, and it's not just one level that can just be completely discounted in 20 minutes. There's several different levels to all of this, whether it's Martin Luther King or RFK, JFK, 9/11. There's all kinds of levels that are in different levels of where, well, if this doesn't point to a conspiracy, then this part definitely does.
Exactly. Exactly. And then, of course, and let us not forget that we're embarking on another anniversary in just a couple of days. We haven't hit 50 yet, but in 2 years we will, and that is the shootings at Kent State.
Oh yeah, true. May 5th,
where 4
right?
students lost their lives, and it's the same kind of thing. What was the investigation like? Was it impartial? Did anyone stand trial really? And with the primary evidence, face it in court? And the answer for all of these is no. Now, is that a coincidence, or is that by design? The thing about the RFK case, which again, like you pointed out, happened 2 months after King's assassination, was that the district attorney in Los Angeles said, we are not going to have another Dallas, which of course was a indictment of how the JFK case was handled in Dallas, how inept it was, how the evidence was bungled and destroyed and so forth and so on. And he said, well, we're not going to have this happen in the RFK case. No, not at all. We're going to be, very diligent and we're not going to make the same mistakes in Dallas. Well, not only did they make the same mistakes in Dallas, they made fresh new ones. Forgetting, of course, that King's assassination 2 months before that was the same pattern of ineptitude, of unaccountability, of destruction of evidence, of a non-prosecutorial finding of a lone assassin in King's case, even before the assassin was apprehended.
Right.
I mean, how do you do that? How do you say that King was assassinated by one person when you haven't even arrested anyone yet? So these themes that that run through, like you said, the trinity of assassinations in the 60s, they're all similar in their incompetence, and then it's up to you to decide whether or not it was intentional, or if we have the most incompetent police departments in Memphis, Los Angeles, and Dallas.
Just as an aside, if you have a higher conspirators here, just as a speculation, would they have set this up to where we know that this city has a really corrupt police force and they're going to bungle the investigation? That's almost like part of the conspiracy in and of itself.
Well, yeah, but again, please keep in mind, and your listeners got to keep in mind about what it was like in the 1960s as far as institutional respect was concerned and institutional jurisdiction. You're not going to have, in the 1960s, you weren't going to have too many sheriffs or chiefs of police that would say to the Secret Service or the FBI, fuck off, we're going to do this investigation ourselves. When the FBI swooped in and said, we're taking over, they said, yeah, go ahead. You're the FBI. Who are we? So it was that, I guess, that reliance on the reputation of the FBI and, of course, the intimidation factor of the FBI that allowed them then to conduct the investigation they wanted to. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's what has to be remembered. Conspiracies do not have to be planned out, written out, mapped out every step of the way. Sometimes you let pieces fall into place and you have contingency plans. If it happens this way, if it happens this way, if it happens this way. I mean, you've got, damage control. You've got, scenarios in which you can handle anything that happens that you weren't expecting. It's like you're watching a soccer game, right? And somebody takes a shot from far out. The defender dives in front of the shot. It goes off his leg and then goes into the net. Well, is that a conspiracy to score on the goalkeeper by his own teammate, or was it just a fluke? I mean, some things happen because they're set in motion,
Right.
not knowing what the outcome is going to be, but confident that should anything go wrong, we've got people in place, or we have protocols in place that can minimize any damage to that. The example that I always give about part of conspiracy but not knowing that you're part of a conspiracy is Special Agent James Hosty down in the Dallas field office in 1963, who was trying to contact Oswald for an interview. And he went to Oswald's house a couple of times and instead interviewed Marina. When Oswald found out about this, he was incensed. He went down to the field office to talk to James Hosty, to basically say, leave my wife alone. She's got nothing to do with, whatever I'm involved in. You leave my wife alone. So he writes him this note, right? Because Hosty wasn't in the office when Oswald visited. So he scribbles this angry note on a piece of paper. It's given to Hosty. Hosty doesn't do anything with it, just sticks it in a file. But after the assassination, and after Oswald is killed 2 days later, Hosty then takes it to his supervisor and says, well, what do I do with this note? And his supervisor says, destroy it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Hosty goes into the bathroom and he flushes it down the toilet. Well, I mean, Hosty's part of the conspiracy now, even though he doesn't know why his boss told him to destroy it. He didn't ask questions.
Right.
He was a G-man and he did what he was told to do.
He's just a cog in a machine. Yeah.
Exactly. So he's going to do basically the same thing that any law enforcement official will do, whether it's a cop, whether it's a sheriff, whether it's, whatever, that if you're told to do something by a superior, you're going to do it. And it goes right on down the line, whether it's a mayor that has, intelligence documents destroyed, or it's, a chief police that has photographs destroyed in a hospital incinerator. You do what you're told. And that's that.
Right.
So conspiracies can happen, they can either be very, very contrived, or they can just be free-for-alls where we let the chips fall where they are, or wherever they will.
Well, let's talk about King. One of the motivations for killing King, and one of the things that I hear all the time about why King may have been killed was because of his speaking out against Vietnam.
Right.
So,
and that's true, and that's more of a late development in King's political and socioeconomic thinking. He wasn't always against the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War started for real in 1965, but he's not coming out publicly and thoughtfully against the war until 1967. So what's his change of heart? Well, whether it's, an arc of consciousness, of learning more, of being more bold because some of his non-violent methods aren't working, or he's facing different ideologies in the Black liberation movement in the form of Black power and Black militancy, and he has got to adjust. Kind of like what Malcolm X said, is once he recanted his indoctrinated all white people are the devils, and he split from the Nation of Islam, actually went, to Mecca and went to, to the Middle East and started thinking for himself. He said when he came back that he would work with anyone who was for human and civil rights. I mean, this is the same Malcolm X that was calling all of the other civil rights leaders at the time, including Martin Luther King, Uncle Toms.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But now he has a change of heart. I think it was the same thing with Martin Luther King and his stance on Vietnam. I think he was also changing his stance on nonviolence. But him speaking out on Vietnam wasn't what the government claims was the reason that Ray killed him. It was racism, because that was the easy thing to do. It's easy to pin the murder of the civil rights leader in the 60s on a racist, just like it was easy to pin the assassination of a president on a communist. at the height of the Cold War. So it was easy to sell that to the American people as the motivation for this person having been killed. And so if you can paint the accused assassin as, whatever ideology you need to paint him with, whether it's communism, whether it's racism, whether it's in Sirhan Sirhan's case, anti-Israel, sentiments, it's so much easier to convict them in the press. So Martin Luther King, while he was speaking out against the war in Vietnam, that wasn't one of the motivations that anyone attributed to Ray's alleged motivations for killing him. It was pure racism.
What was King doing in Memphis? Why was he there?
Well, it was a return trip that King was making to Memphis because his first trip there to assist in a sanitation workers wildcat strike turned violent. Unbeknownst to him, certainly beyond his control, you have a crowd of 2,000-3,000 people who are marching in the street, and like I said, some of this militant, some of this more vibrato and brave young black liberators are less and less patient with the nonviolent movement, and so whoever was responsible, windows started being broken, and so when vandalism started happening, then the police moved in, of course, with their calming influence always. And a 16-year-old was shot and killed in the melee. And so Martin Luther King basically fled, fearing for his safety. I don't know if it was his choice or if it was his, security team or the people who were around him that said, look, you got to get out of here and let this thing cool down. So he did retreat and then came back in late March to once again march with the striking sanitation workers. And that's why he was in Memphis. So this was a prologue to the Poor People's Campaign that he was organizing for Washington, D.C. later that year. So he felt compelled to be there with these workers who were not making enough money, who were overworked in the sanitation department, and so that's where he felt he needed to be at that time.
And then the official story is that Ray was in a boarding house next to the Lorraine Motel, and across a courtyard.
Okay. If you think of it, I mean, we don't have the advantage of pictures or anything like that to show your listeners, but if you would imagine that you have one building on the other side, there's a large courtyard and like a side street that divides the Lorraine Motel from Bessie Brewer's rooming house. It was an enclave of buildings, and each part of the building was a different business. One was a bar, then the rooming house, and then there was like an amusement called Canopies amusement store. So it was like just a row of storefronts, and at the back of that row of storefronts was the bathroom window for the rooming house that looked out over the courtyard and onto the Lorraine Motel.
Okay. And then King was shot.
So he rented a room. He rented a room in that rooming house that was one room away from the bathroom where the shot allegedly came from. Using a rifle, much like Oswald. Remember, listeners. Oswald ordered his rifle through the mail. Ray picked his up at a sporting goods store. But of course, then returned his original because he got the wrong one and exchanged it for a different one. And much like we can surmise with Lee Harvey Oswald, he was told to do it. Ray actually says that he was told to buy a pair of binoculars and to buy this rifle, and to meet this person that he had met up in Canada at Jim's Grill. So, but you have to remember that Ray at this point, at the time of King's assassination, was a fugitive. He had escaped from prison. So for a year, he was basically on the run, and he went lots of different places. He went to Los Angeles, he went to Canada, he went to Mexico, Alabama, and then of course Memphis. Now you have to ask yourself, well, if he had been in prison, escaped, how in the hell is he getting all over the country and to other countries and bought a car with no money? So the FBI tried very, very hard to find any evidence that Ray, who was a small-time burglar and robber, how he could have gotten enough money. And as much as they tried to pin unsolved bank robberies on him, they simply couldn't do it. As a matter of fact, that FBI task force report from 1977, which I spoke of earlier, concluded that it still remains a mystery where he got his money. And that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So just like, well, how could Oswald have traveled to Mexico and the Soviet Union and gotten back and blah, blah, blah? How could he have made all those extravagant trips if he didn't have any money? So, and then of course that's a question that was never fully either investigated or completely answered by the government.
Yeah, just kind of glossed over.
Right. So Ray's in Memphis. He finds himself in Memphis now, ostensibly because he's just so pissed off at King, because he's a virulent racist, and so he needs to kill King. And from the bathroom of his rooming house, he takes one shot at King, and it hits its mark quite effectively. And then flees, and then is able to elude capture until 2 months later when he's tagged in at Heathrow Airport in London.
Now, there's been a lot of speculation on this character that he is supposed to meet called Raul.
Yes.
About who this may have been.
Right.
What's kind of the speculation on the possibilities of if this person existed? Who would he have been?
Well, according to the government, Raul was simply just a pseudonym for one of his brothers. Ray had two other brothers, and again, some of the robberies that took place, they did in collusion with each other. Others they didn't, but they were trying to say that Raul was simply the way that Ray got this money. And they got this money through petty crimes along the way, that they'd been traveling together, and that they were just robbing as they needed to get to wherever they were. So in the government's mind, depending on which report you ask, it's either one of his brothers. Raul is either one of his brothers or a completely made up fictitious character that Ray was trying to pin all of this on. According to Ray himself, Raul was somebody that he simply met in Canada, in Toronto. He's at a tavern. He's on the run. And this guy comes up, approaches him, and asks him if he wants to get involved in a money-making scheme, which Ray later figures out is a gun-running scheme between the U.S. and Canada. And Ray, again, needing money and being a petty criminal, says, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And so that's why he now finds himself doing these jobs that Raul has him do, and doing things, obtaining things that Raul tells him to obtain, like this rifle, like binoculars, like, be here at this particular time. And so that's according to Ray himself. But as far as the identity of Raul, it has never been known. And like I said, Ray dying in 1998 precludes us probably from ever finding out.
I remember there was a possibility, I may have read somewhere, that some people thought it was James Jesus Angleton that might have been Raul.
Actually, now that you say that, yes. Yeah. Angleton is a strange character because of the fact that he was a career CIA agent, and him and David Atlee Phillips and others being either masters of disguises or being in the right place at the right time. Now, whether they were handlers for either George de Mohrenschildt, who befriended Oswald in Dallas, or Oswald himself, or like you said, James Earl Ray, these are questions that have been proffered and are absolutely worthy of investigation. Unfortunately, because of the governmental bodies that have investigated the JFK assassination and the Martin Luther King assassination, they didn't want to dig any deeper. Or, like I said about the institutional respect and authority that intelligence agencies like the CIA and the FBI had, they didn't want to press them. They simply didn't want to have the power of their investigative body to go up against the CIA, to flesh some of this stuff out and to try to make these kind of connections that have been suggested. But you're absolutely right, Raul. That was one of the possibilities of who Raul was. That is, being a handler, a CIA agent, career CIA station chief, being a handler for one of the most notorious assassins in our history.
Now, I was reading today about some of the lawsuits that the King family did. They actually sued this guy named Lee Jowers, who's kind of an alternate suspect to Ray. Probably the strongest one. And it seemed like it seemed like it depended on who you spoke to. Like the FBI said that his sister helped him out, made everything up so she could get money for her. She could get money for her income tax, to pay her income tax, that kind of stuff like that. So was this guy, was he a possibility as the real assassin, or is this just kind of another dead end?
He absolutely was, because his name was Lloyd Jowers, and he was the owner of Jim's Grill, which was right next to Bessie Brewer's rooming house, where the alleged shot took place. So not only do we have him in the absolutely in the area where King was killed, but you also have an association with James Earl Ray. Now, Lloyd Jowers, before he died, there's a deathbed confession where he claims that he was in fact approached by, if I remember correctly, a syndicate in St. Louis, Missouri, of all places. One of the places that Ray knows very well, because he was raised there for a short period of time. That it was Jowers who was approached by this syndicate, or a representative of the syndicate, to hire a hitman to kill King. So, according to Jowers, he wasn't actually the hitman. He hired someone to do the assassination, and it wasn't Ray. Because he said, I mean, the last person I would hire to kill King would be James Earl Ray. So again, we have somebody who claims to have firsthand knowledge of who did in fact kill King and why. And now that he has died, I mean, his testimony is still there. Like you said, his sister's testimony is still there, and there are still threads that can be followed. But of course, the Justice Department has not. Even at the urging of the King family, even as James Earl Ray was dying and wanted a new trial to set the record straight, they simply refused to do that. So where a portion of this history has been lost forever, like I said, there are still some threads that can still be followed and investigated, and at least either completely proven to be false, or certainly within the realm of possibility. So I think that Jowers was an important figure. Just to what extent, we don't know yet. But those are the reports. Either that he was the actual hitman, which some people contend, and he just said that he was hired to hire, like he was the middleman for the actual assassin, or like Jowers himself said, hey, I was just the middleman.
What do
So-
you think? So, what do you think happened? If you had to speculate, who did this? Who might have pulled this off?
Well, and from a lot of the conspiracy theories, it's the FBI, and that is about as easy to point to as a motivation for the FBI as racism is to point to James Earl Ray. That is, people that have even the slightest understanding of Martin Luther King knows that he was hounded by the FBI from the get-go. That J. Edgar Hoover considered him to be a hoax, a fraud, communist infiltrated, and one of the biggest internal threats to the United States of America. So, having declared King an actual enemy, the amount of surveillance that was assigned to King, that he was bugged, that his lawyers were bugged, and surveilled constantly, and even methods of COINTELPRO or counterintelligence methods were used against King, like the infamous suicide letter, where somebody anonymously wrote to King urging him to kill himself.
Yeah,
because we have the tapes of your sexual deviancy, and just look, J. Edgar Hoover was so into that. He himself a sexual deviant. That's probably why he was so obsessed with the sex lives of everyone that he investigated, that he put this forth against King. So of course people are going to look at, well, J. Edgar Hoover, he has a huge reason for wanting King dead, and so wasn't the FBI. Well, it's not quite that clear cut. Much like the remaining JFK assassination documents were supposed to have been released, and it was up to Trump to either sign off on it or give intelligence agencies who created these documents an opportunity to say why he should continue to classify them. Well, he has stalled on that, so they have not been released. It's the same thing with the King assassination as well. When the House Select Committee on Assassinations reinvestigated in the late 70s, they sealed all of their records for 50 years. Well, there has not been a public outcry about that. It has basically been centered on JFK's documents. And I can't tell you why. I can't tell you why Kennedy's assassination is more important than King's in the eyes of researchers or historians or even the general public. But much of the evidentiary much of the evidence that the FBI even relied on to come to their conclusions have been sealed. The interviews that they've done, the leads that they've followed, even the staff of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, their leads and their interviews are all sealed. So we really don't know the extent to which the FBI could have been involved. It's not as clear cut as, say, like with Fred Hampton, which was absolutely a state-sponsored assassination.
Right.
But certainly the motivation is there. We just don't have the documentation to establish that. But what I think happened was that it was an attempt by whoever wanted him dead, whether it was a conspiracy of the FBI found out that there was a plot to kill Kennedy and allowed it to happen, just like in New York City, when the New York Police Department knew that there was going to be an attempt on Malcolm's life. I mean, how many attempts on Malcolm's life were there before he was finally assassinated in 1965? 11? And they knew all of them. They had to have, because he was surveilled just as much as King was. So if they caught wind of a plot and said, well, you know what? We're not going to stop it. That's not exactly the FBI killing King, but it's allowing it to happen. Not, either whether withdrawing task force units that were assigned to the area around the Lorraine Motel, but then pulled them back on the 4th, or dismissing the black detectives who were supposed to be watching King You dismiss them for the night. They may have moved some things around and may have directed certain things to happen. But if, like I said, if they knew that something was going to happen to King and allowed it to happen, then it's just as bad. But, legally it's not the same. I'm just saying, we don't know which of those scenarios took place, whether the FBI had a direct involvement in his assassination or whether they knew that it was going to happen and simply allowed it to take place.
Right.
And then covered that up.
Right. Get somebody to blame. Yeah.
Well, it was one of the methods that Hoover said was quite effective. That is, if you have people, look, you're already talking about a deeply divided country at the time, with all of the liberation movements, not just the Black liberation movement, but also the women's liberation, gay liberation, the student movement, the anti-war movement. We are completely divided in the 1960s as a country. So if foment already exists, then you stoke the fires of that and let it burn. And that's exactly what COINTELPRO was designed to do. These programs that were designed to pit these groups or organizations or even individuals against each other where there was already animus, and they'll kill each other off.
Yeah. That's
what they were hoping to do with the Black Panther Party and us, which was a Afrocentric, Black militant group in California. You stoke the fire between these two competing Black liberation movements, the Black Panther Party and us, and you send anonymous letters, you defamatory cartoons and posters designed to get them pissed off at each other enough that they'll just kill each other off, and the FBI just stands back and watches it happen. The same thing with Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam, and even in Chicago with Fred Hampton, it was the Black Panther Party and the Black Peace Zone Nation. But it didn't work in Chicago. That's why they were pissed off at Fred Hampton, because he wasn't buying it.
Huh.
He and Jeff Fort didn't buy it. They still hated each other, and they still knew that they couldn't work together because they had different aims and goals. But as long as they didn't work against each other, they were fine. You know what I mean? So they weren't going to have any of that. And that's one of the reasons why Fred Hampton had to be killed, because he was entirely too smart for that. But as far as King is concerned, you stoke the fire that's already there and watch everyone burn down. And you can just stand back and say, cool, we don't have to worry about this anymore.
Turning to Robert Kennedy.
Yeah.
This one is, it seems on the surface straightforward. Sirhan Sirhan, because this time it's done with a pistol.
Yep.
A classic assassination technique.
The classic smoking gun. We have a smoking gun finally.
Right.
He
points, he shoots.
And the John Kennedy case. What's that?
Oh, he points, he shoots, he's there, and that's it. Case closed.
Kitchen pantry. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But there's not so much so.
And like I said, he confesses to it. We can talk about that confession or his guilty plea later. But yeah, so he's caught at the scene, gun in hand, smoking gun, open and shut. Right. Well, what makes the Robert Kennedy case so much different than even the Warren Commission in the case of John Kennedy, or nobody in the Martin Luther King case, is that for all the criticism of the Warren Commission, which was the official investigative body that investigated President Kennedy's assassination, they released a 900-page report in September of 64. And then in December of 64, they published 26 volumes of testimony and exhibits. It gave at least the outward appearance of a very thorough investigation. With Robert Kennedy's assassination, you had the Los Angeles Police Department investigate, write a report, and that report remained classified for 20 years. We didn't even have the report of Robert Kennedy's death and the investigation into his death for 20 years, and they had to be sued for it. The district attorney of Los Angeles had to be sued to release it. Now, I'm not talking about releasing a report with less redactions. I'm not talking about releasing a report, in its entirety because you only released the summary of it. They released nothing. So for 20 years, you've got people like, Phil Melanson and Greg Stone and all of these JFK researchers. Come on, his name escapes me now. Documentarian. Two Guns. He was there at the time of the assassination. Yeah, it'll come to me. These guys had to, from the start, do their own investigative work because there was no official report to then, to either refute or, question. And it was one of the ones that wasn't investigated by the FBI. It's that one time that they gave jurisdiction to the Los Angeles Police Department to investigate fully. Now they relied on the FBI because of their laboratory, because the FBI isn't just a bunch of G-men and spies and things like that. They do have a reputable laboratory and scientific facilities. So whenever a local police department or sheriff's office or even state police need additional testing on evidence, they send it to the FBI, and that's what the LAPD did. But just like with the John Kennedy case, you had instances of destruction of evidence, of browbeating witnesses into either recanting a story that doesn't fit with the single assassin narrative, or completely shutting down those that could lead to someone other than Sirhan Sirhan. But the most egregious, of course, I think is there was actually a magic bullet in the Robert Kennedy case. So here, Evel Younger is saying, the district attorney is saying, we're not going to have another Dallas. And sure as shit, you came up with your own single bullet theory. The single bullet theory in Robert Kennedy's case is, okay, because I didn't give the narrative yet. So Robert Kennedy is running in the presidential primary for the 1968 presidential election. So he's trying to get his party's nomination to be their candidate to run against the Republican candidate in the 1968 presidential election.
Right.
He's been campaigning since March of 68. That's when he announced his candidacy. It wasn't a year before. It wasn't a year and a half before, which is common because you need time to get a campaign staff and to map things out. I mean, he was the campaign manager for John Kennedy in his Senate, in his congressional, senatorial, and presidential campaigns. That stuff takes time. But Robert Kennedy announces in March of 68. And by June, he is in a neck-to-neck with Eugene McCarthy.
And a lot of that was because Johnson did not run again.
Exactly.
He didn't seek re-election. Yeah.
Exactly. Robert did not want to run against Johnson for his own reasons. I mean, we can argue about, whether that was entirely too unselfish or for whatever reason. But once Johnson said, "Look, I'm not going to seek another term because I'm embroiled in Vietnam and it's just not good for the country," that's when Robert said, "Okay, I'm in the race." So by June of 68, he is fully in the race. Neck and neck with Eugene McCarthy. He loses in Oregon, which is McCarthy territory, but then campaigns in California, the last stop on the primary campaign, and he just blows them all over. I mean, he just impresses everywhere he goes. And the evening that he is shot, they are at the Ambassador Hotel. because that's where the campaign headquarters was, and waiting for the returns of California. And when it was announced that he had won California, then they gathered in the ballroom and he made an acceptance speech. Then a little after 12 o'clock, midnight, their time, he leaves because he wants to go to a press conference before he goes to a party. So in order to leave the ballroom, which is just absolutely crammed with people, I mean, beyond, the legal fire codes, that's how packed that place was. He goes in a back way down a corridor and into a kitchen pantry, which is where they prepare the food for the hotel. And when he is shaking hands with a line of wait staff, he's being led by a maitre d', but he's trying to shake hands with these people because he was very generous that way. Sirhan Sirhan steps out from an ice stacking tray or a stacking tray by an ice machine and fires his revolver 8 times into a crowd that is now following Robert Kennedy through the kitchen pantry. 4 people besides Robert Kennedy were shot. They all lived. But Robert Kennedy was shot 3 times, once in the head, and succumbed to his injuries the next day. So now that I said all that, I completely lost the train of thought before I did the narrative.
Yes, Sirhan.
Oh, the single bullet theory. Sorry,
the single bullet theory.
In this case, was the criminologist for the LAPD claims that the bullet that struck Elizabeth Evans, one of the people in the crowd behind Robert Kennedy, had come from Sirhan's gun, went up into the ceiling. It had a drop ceiling with ceiling tiles.
Uh-huh.
So it goes through that, hits the floor above, comes back down, strikes Elizabeth in the middle of the forehead as she's bending down to retrieve her lost shoe because somebody had stepped on her heel. She lost her shoe, so she's bending down to pick it up, and that's when she gets hit in the head. So the bullet had to have gone through the ceiling, hit the floor, back through the ceiling onto the floor of the kitchen pantry to come upward to strike Elizabeth in the head. And of course, the bullet that was removed from her head was intact.
Of course.
Yeah. So, but much like the JFK case, the same thing happened with the RFK case. You decide that Sirhan Sirhan with the smoking gun is the only assassin. He's got 8 bullets to do all of the damage in the pantry. Any more than 8 bullets, and there's another shooter. Okay, they did that with the JFK case too. We've decided Oswald did it, and did it with only 3 bullets.
Right.
So now we've backed ourselves in a corner, and that's when they had to come up with the magic bullet theory. The same thing with the Robert Kennedy case. Robert hit 3 times, 4 other victims. That leaves 1 bullet that they claim was lost up in the ceiling. So a bullet, 1 bullet that hits Evans goes through the ceiling, comes back down, but the one that's missing, the 8th bullet, goes up into the ceiling and doesn't come down. So any evidence of any further bullets, and there's another shooter. And of course, what happens? There's lots of evidence of more than 8 bullets. The door jam, the door that Robert Kennedy had to come through to get into the kitchen pantry. It was a swing door. Think of like a restaurant, an in and out door for wait staff. Swinging doors. You go on one side to go in, you go on the other side to go out, right? They're swinging doors. Well, the door jam for those swinging doors, there are photographs that not only UPI photographers took, but also the FBI itself, of bullet holes. And, of course, the initials of the officers that actually pulled a bullet out of one of those holes. Now, what happened to that bullet, of course, we don't know, because it was never either booked into evidence, or it was lost or stolen, or what have you. And the door jams themselves, FBI, trying to be helpful, said, we're going to remove them and test them. So they removed those. They removed the ceiling panels that the bullets went through in the ceiling, and then, of course, those were destroyed.
Right.
So we have lots of evidence of more than 8 shots, not only photographically and testimony of the people who were there and saw an officer dig a bullet out of the wood, but we also have a recording that was recently surfaced about, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, that was subjected to very good acoustic analysis, and 14 shots can be heard on this recording.
Whoa.
So
Whoa.
I don't know why Robert Kennedy's case didn't receive the same kind of attention as John Kennedy's assassination or even Martin Luther King's assassination. I don't know why the House Select Committee on Assassinations didn't reinvestigate Robert Kennedy's assassination. I think it has to do with the fact that there was no official report to dissect and to question. You know what I mean?
That was hidden away.
It was hidden away. It wasn't released. So there was nothing on which to base a new investigation. There was no controversy other than those that were being speculated, you know.
Because it seemed like they had their
journalists.
man. He pleaded guilty.
Exactly.
And that was case closed. So let's get into the really good stuff. Because Sirhan Sirhan, there's been all this speculation that he was a Manchurian candidate, basically.
Absolutely.
So what's your thoughts on that?
We talk about the CIA and its status in the world, and in the 1960s even more so, which is actually pretty impressive given the fact that they were a newly created organization. I mean, you're talking about the late 1940s. This is post-World War II. The CIA was created with its charter, which they never followed. And now you've got them being very interested, always having been fascinated with the idea of mind control. Whether it can be applied, if you can control someone's mind, whether that can be applied to the battlefield, whether you can apply it to restorative cognitive function, like if you have somebody who has a brain injury, whether that can be preempted by the use of drugs or hypnosis or whatever they find with the scientists that they've come up with and used. But also the idea of being able to have someone do something that they wouldn't normally do on their own, and then allow them to erase it, to forget about it. So the perfect, I guess, spy would be that spy that could be induced to do something they wouldn't do voluntarily, and then allow them to erase that from their mind, which is basically evidence of them having done it. And so this was the idea of the Manchurian Candidate. And because of Sirhan Sirhan's demeanor right after the assassination, because of his demeanor throughout the quote-unquote trial, because of his demeanor in the intervening years that he's been interviewed by psychiatrists, psychologists, and so forth and so on, there is the persuasive and overwhelming opinion that based on these interviews and based on his behavior and the fact that he can remember some things but not other things, that he superimposes this memory onto this which he made up, whatever was going on in his mind, it is of many people's opinions that he was a Manchurian Candidate, that he had been hypnotized prior to the shooting, that he emptied his revolver into a crowd, none of those bullets ever striking Robert Kennedy, but then not being able to recall not only the shooting, but also the events leading up to the shooting. And then, like I said, his demeanor afterwards.
Yeah, he still can't. He still can't. Yeah.
No, he still can't. And that's very strange. And that's very strange for somebody who is just otherwise a sociopath, or what we classify as a sociopath, or someone who is disturbed, or as the government claims, well, when I say government, I mean the LAPD, that the reason he can't remember is because of a horse riding accident that he had when he was 10.
Okay.
He fell and hit his head, so now he's screwed up forever. So,
wow.
yeah. Well, isn't that the reason that Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy, 20 years later, is because he was in an orphanage and daddy didn't love him, and,
Is that why they examined his pubic hairs in the Warren Commission?
Exactly. Or Jack Ruby's mother's teeth from 1938. I mean, that's really thorough.
Did it the same?
But it's that same thing of classifying these assassins as loners. Bill Hicks, the comedian, beautifully pointed out about Lee Harvey Oswald. They called him a loner. How are you a loner with a wife and 2 kids?
Yeah.
and with James Earl Ray, he's supposed to be a loner, but you know what he did when he was in California? He escapes from prison. He's on the run. He goes to Los Angeles for a few months, and you know what he does in Los Angeles? Takes dance lessons for 5 weeks. He goes to a bartending school and becomes a bartender. Does this sound like a loner to you?
Right.
Very antisocial behavior. Yeah.
Very antisocial. Absolutely. I'm going to dance by myself and 4 drinks for one. I mean, come on.
Didn't the same psychiatrist interview Sirhan after the assassination that also he ended up interviewing Mark David Chapman after the Lennon assassination?
That I don't know.
I think that may be true.
That I don't know.
Yeah.
It absolutely may be true.
I've just always thought that was
I'm remembering
rather
correctly,
interesting.
And maybe it's the guy who some researchers attribute to being the person who hypnotized Sirhan Sirhan, who's no longer alive. Maybe I'm conflating those two. But yeah, I'm not sure about that. I hadn't heard that. But
there's also this strange element in the RFK assassination of the woman with the polka dot dress.
Yes. Mm. Yep. Kathy Sue Fulmer, who of course you can't. She wasn't wearing a polka dot. Well, she was, but it was green with yellow polka dots. And she had just had a skiing accident, so she was in a hip high cast on crutches. So kind of hard to misidentify her as the polka dot girl, because the polka dot girl apparently with Sirhan Sirhan ran out.
Right.
Of or she, because Sirhan was apprehended right there. But the girl with the polka dot dress ran out and screamed, "We've shot him! We shot him! We shot him!" Well, guess what? She couldn't have done that because, well, she had a cast and crutches. So, but the mystery of the polka dot girl, they could never find out who that was.
There's been some speculation.
She was reported as having had a drink with Sirhan Sirhan.
Okay.
In the hotel prior to the shooting. Of course, he didn't drink, but and people question whether or not she was part of maintaining his hypnosis, or she was a figure that he could fixate on to keep him, on an even keel. I can't remember all of the details of the Manchurian Candidate or what her role would have been to be there with him, but but that's one of the lasting unknowns of the case, is who was the girl in the polka dot dress, which many people saw, and yeah, absolutely. So saw her with him, and of course it was always also Sirhan Sirhan was characterized as, well, shy, and that's different than being a loner, but not very outgoing or very talkative in company. So why would he be talking to this beautiful girl at the bar and, so forth and so on. So it's still a mystery, but I think the most important thing to take away from this case, and why I think that it should be reopened. It's 50 years past due. to be investigated fully. But it's the fact that Sirhan Sirhan could not have killed Robert Kennedy. He fired his weapon. He emptied those 8 bullets into the crowd. He did shoot those 4 people, for which he has served his prison time at least threefold. Because attempted murder is different than obviously murder, and since he's been in prison for 50 years, you don't put somebody in prison for 50 years for attempted murder. But he physically could not have killed Robert Kennedy because of the wounds on Kennedy's body and the proximity of the shooter to Robert Kennedy. When you have, well, I talked about this earlier about John Kennedy's autopsy and Harold Weisberg characterizing it as fit for a Bowery bum. Robert Kennedy's was completely opposite. Thomas Noguchi, who was the medical examiner for Los Angeles County, his autopsy report is 60 pages long. He spoke of scraping Robert Kennedy's fingernails and doing a microscopic examination of whatever was underneath it. Not because he suspected anything, like cocaine or, somebody else's blood. It was simply because he wanted to be that thorough. Okay? He was not going to let anything impugn his work or this autopsy. So it was incredibly thorough. The most moving part of the autopsy report when you read it is that, medical examiners see a lot of vile shit. They see unspeakable things, and they still have to do their job. They have to desensitize themselves. But every now and then you have a medical examiner who is tweaked by conscience and has to alter what he or she does just to get through it. Thomas Noguchi had to put a towel over Robert Kennedy's face as he did the autopsy. Because he was that emotionally, affected by the person that he had to examine. Now the strange thing, let's jump back over to the King case. The strange thing is that Jerry Francisco, who was the Shelby County medical examiner who did King's autopsy, he said that he did not track the wound through King's jaw and neck because he didn't want to further destroy King's body. Like, sensitivity prevented him from doing his job correctly, right? So because he didn't examine the wound and track the wound, a specific or exact measurement couldn't be made of the angle through King's body, which is obviously necessary to find out where the shot came from. So because he didn't do his job, simply because he didn't want to further mutilate his body, which I think is what an autopsy is. Have you guys ever been to an autopsy?
No, can't say I've had the pleasure.
It is a pretty thorough mutilation of a body. I mean, I'm not talking about, chainsaw, it's neat, but it's a mutilation. It's a taking apart of a human body. So for him to say that he didn't track a bullet wound because he didn't want to further deform King's body is ridiculous. But Noguchi's was a completely different thing, where he was, like a medical examiner who has to do an autopsy on a child. You can imagine why that's so emotionally charged and why they might have to make some adjustments. But it was Thomas Noguchi and his thoroughness of that autopsy that established that the gun that fired the bullets into Robert Kennedy's body was only, anywhere from 2 to 6 inches for the head, and then 6 inches to a foot on the rest of his body. There was actual soot and gunpowder residue embedded into Robert Kennedy's scalp behind his ear. So the gun was almost near contact. And Sirhan Sirhan was never that close to Robert Kennedy. And he was never behind him either. That's the other thing, is that all of the bullet wounds to Robert Kennedy was from behind.
Wow.
And a steep upward trajectory. Not a horizontal trajectory, like the other victims experienced. You've got a leg wound, you've got a belly wound, right? Because Sirhan Sirhan was being pinned against a table as he continued to fire. So the table was waist high. So the gun is pinned onto a table and he's still shooting, again, on a horizontal, right? But before he was pinned to the table, he simply reached out his arm. Well, he was only 5'6". So he's not very tall. So he reaches his hand out with the gun, and after the second shot is then pinned to the table where he fires the rest of the bullets. But Robert Kennedy had his back turned to him and was never closer than 2 to 3 feet, not inches. So there had to have been a gunman behind Robert Kennedy, close and armed.
Somebody to make sure that it got done.
Absolutely. And there was. His name was Thane Eugene Caesar. He was a rent-a-thug cop that was hired by the hotel to provide security. And he was armed. And guess where he was?
Behind him.
He was behind Robert Kennedy. The famous photograph, there's lots of famous photographs, Bill Epridge, but Boris Yoro. You'll know this picture. A lot of people have seen it, of Robert Kennedy is right after he was shot, sprawled on the pantry floor, and next to him is a busboy is kneeling next to him, cradling his head.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look on that photograph, to the right of Robert Kennedy on the ground is a clip-on tie. That was the tie that Thane Eugene Caesar was wearing at the time of the shooting. So if you imagine Thane Eugene Caesar behind Robert Kennedy, putting his gun right up against him to muffle the sound, shooting him 3 times and everyone falling backwards, I think Robert Kennedy reached around, grabbed his tie and pulled it off of him.
So who did this guy, I mean, what would be his connection to?
Well, again, we don't know because he was not interviewed. Now, Dan Moldea, who was an investigative journalist, did a wonderful piece on the Robert Kennedy assassination for Gardy's magazine in 1987, pointing out all of these inconsistencies, pointing out the fact that the LAPD hadn't released their report, looking at the ballistic evidence, the photographs of the bullet holes in the pantry and the missing, ceiling tiles and the 2,400 case photographs that were burned in a hospital incinerator. He looked at all of this and actually identified Thane Eugene Caesar as the shooter. But leap forward a few years, and now he writes a book called The Killing of Robert Kennedy, where he befriends Thane Eugene Caesar, and in fact becomes his ipso facto agent, and says he didn't do it. I don't know what turned Dan Moldea, but it is a very, very strange,
Yeah, I have heard about that. Sure. Yeah. With the same forces,
But Thane Eugene Caesar has never been questioned to that extent. He has not been, the gun that he owned at the time, that he claimed he owned at the time, he said he sold to a private owner.
Yeah.
So we can't test the gun that he had the night of the shooting, and he's never been properly deposed because again, this has not been investigated. It has not had. The investigative body has not had the power of subpoena and like the special prosecutor Robert Mueller does right now. That's what we need for all of these cases is a special prosecutor, special investigator.
Yeah.
That says, look, we're gonna question Thane Eugene Caesar extensively. We're going to exhume President Kennedy's body. We are going to, actually exhume John Connally too, because he still has metal in his wrist. Remember?
Right.
You had researchers who tried to prevent his wife Nellie Connally from putting him in the ground until that metal could be removed from his wrist. But of course, she didn't let that happen. So he was buried with evidence, still in him. But unless you have investigations that are willing to do that, unless you have investigations that are willing to open up all of the files, including, yes, the distasteful autopsy photographs as well. But unless we can establish that, yes, these are the autopsy photographs that were taken that night, and that what is depicted in these photographs was actually John Kennedy and the wounds that he had received in Dallas, as opposed to, between Dallas and Washington. Until we do that all of this is, like I said, speculation. And for those who criticize people like myself and you and your entourage over there, the reason that we're criticized for looking into this and suggesting that it may not have happened the way the government says is because the government had its chance to do it right, and they blew it.
Right.
Okay. I am not impressed that 50, 55 years later, some Yahoo in the northern country of Michigan can take a Mannlicher Carcano rifle and train himself to fire off 3 shots in under 6 seconds. It doesn't impress me, because if you work on something long enough, of course, you're going to be able to disprove it, or you're going to be able to do whatever you set out to do. But back in '64, when you had FBI marksmen, when you had the opportunity to test the actual rifle and the actual bullets, and you couldn't duplicate it, you couldn't prove your case then.
Mm-hmm.
You blew that opportunity. You know what I mean? Now, that's not the case with advances in technology. If we want to compare the bullet fragments that came out of King's body with the bullets that were found supposedly in Ray's belongings, that I get. That you can do. Okay, we didn't have the technology back then, but we have the technology now. But as far as things like marksmanship, adrenaline, whether or not Lee Harvey Oswald or even James Earl Ray had the expertise to do what the government said they did. I mean, we talked about Oswald and the fact that the only time the government could put a rifle in Lee Harvey Oswald's hands was 4 years before the assassination. And when I say that, I don't mean the backyard photographs. I mean a good weapon where he had been trained on a weapon and had fired the weapon. Just because he's posing in his backyard with a weapon that he ordered through the mail doesn't mean that he fired it. He didn't. He wasn't practicing. So the only time that the government could have him somewhat efficient with a rifle is 4 years prior to the assassination. And as any marksman will tell you, as any hunter will tell you, that if you go 4 years in between shooting a gun, you're not going to shoot many deer that way. It's the same thing with James Earl Ray. He was in the Navy for 2 years? I think it was 2 years, a little over 2 years. And he got extensive rifle training, right? Then. But you're telling me that not having even a weapon in your hand or practicing, that you're going to take one bullet into the bathroom with you, load it into the rifle, and then with really good accuracy,
yeah,
kill another human being. That's, I mean, Oswald needed 4. Ray only needed 1. I mean, that's confidence. That's, so
this stuff is so crazy. I tell you, it is. More and more you look at it, the more just the government stuff falls apart. Sir Phil's got a question for you.
That
he was wanting to ask you earlier.
Well, it just seems like I wanted to comment. It seems like in both King and I guess both of the Kennedys, and probably X too, because of what X was doing before he got assassinated, it seems like the real red line was them starting to potentially get in the way of foreign policy objectives. That seems like what really might have been a catalyst. It seems like they were, of course, watching them and, marshaling all kinds of things against them, but that was really the red line that set in motion their eventual assassinations, it seems like.
No, that's an excellent observation, an excellent question, and I think that people don't realize is that with all of those assassinations that you mentioned, even Malcolm X, which people don't associate with the two Kennedys and King, as far as either national consciousness or importance. You're absolutely right. And Fred Hampton too. You got to throw Fred Hampton in there. Why was Fred Hampton killed at 21? Because they weren't going to let him get to Malcolm's ripe old age of 39. Malcolm was, what his red line was actually taking the plight of Black America to the United Nations.
Right.
He wanted not to think of civil rights like micro civil rights. He wanted macro human rights. That is, if other countries can be brought before the UN and sanctions can be imposed on countries that do not treat their own citizens humanely, then why couldn't we do that with the United States? The United States that has been guilty of genocide, not only of Native Americans, but also the enslavement and subjugation of an entire Black population. Why can't we bring a petition before the United Nations and hold the United States accountable for their criminal activities? That was incredibly powerful. And do you really think the United States would have stood for that? As far as John Kennedy is concerned, yeah, you asked the question, well, who was he pissing off? It wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald, that's for damn sure, but he was pissing off a lot of other people, and that has to include the Central Intelligence Agency, which in its young, years and trying to establish itself as a formidable intelligence agency, really bungled the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. And John Kennedy publicly took responsibility for it, but privately vowed to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter them to the wind. He wanted to completely redo the intelligence community of the United States, which of course is what Eisenhower, prior to Kennedy taking office, warned us against the unwarranted acquisition of power by the military industrial complex. So Kennedy wanted to please people as he took office. He's young. I think he's having a little doubt himself about his ability to have this immense office. And so he listens to his generals, he listens to his intelligence advisors, and then the Bay of Pigs happens. And it was an incredible embarrassment that publicly he said, look, the buck stops here. I'm the president. I okayed this. I fucked up. So I'm sorry. But behind doors, he fires the top two heads of the CIA. The director that he fired, Alan Dulles, then appears on the very commission that is investigating his assassination 2 years later. I mean, talk about a conflict of interest, but
right.
But that's the biggest toe he stepped on. And you're talking about foreign policy. Well, what was the CIA embroiled in most besides stemming communism in Cuba? It was stemming communism in Vietnam. Yep. Vietnam was a big thing.
Oh yeah.
And Kennedy even suggesting that we let South Vietnam deal with itself. To have our troops come back home by Christmas of '65 was infuriating to the hawks that surrounded him, including, of course, the intelligence agencies. So that was incredibly dangerous. And then we talked about Martin Luther King and his opposition to Vietnam, and given his status in the United States at the time, his huge popularity, I think that he would have, one of the things that they talked about in the American Experience PBS special that was just aired, we talked about this earlier, was what would have happened had King lived? Would he have been a Rhodes Scholar? Would he have been, look what he accomplished in a very short period of time. Had he lived, he would have accomplished a lot more. Maybe he would have been an ambassador to a country. Well, think about that. Think about him and the movement that he was leading and how immense it was, how respected he was, not just in our country, but around the world, enough to get him a Nobel Peace Prize, saying, we've got to get out of Vietnam, saying, we've got to take care of the poor people of the world. A modern day Gandhi. And yeah, that was absolutely antithetical to what our foreign policy was at that time. And then, of course, Robert Kennedy. 2 months later, Robert Kennedy was not only was he a much better politician, not politician, statesman, than his brother, but he was a surrogate now. Now that King was dead, a lot of people that placed all their hope on King now placed it on Robert. And so he was able to galvanize the young movement, the Black movement, the Latino movement, all the movements that were seemingly disconnected and, frantic. Robert Kennedy was absolutely bringing together and responding to, and that made him incredibly dangerous. So that answers your question as far as the thread that goes through the red line of foreign policy expectations by our government, and then of course these young, unflappable leaders that stood in the way of that.
Well, if we're talking about motive, I've always thought that the establishment really felt like it was losing control, so we needed to get rid of these people. Absolutely.
The institutions that I was talking about, the institutional respect, the institutional, it must be true because the FBI said it was true. That was waning. I mean, certainly not to the extent that it would in the wake of Watergate. I mean, that just completely killed it. However, you do have the political assassinations that happened in the 60s. And then, of course, like I said, Kent State, when our country saw that we would send our troops onto college campuses and kill 18-year-olds because they were protesting a war, they were losing traction. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah, nobody went to jail. Nobody was indicted for the murder of these 4 college students, but it was horrifying. Just like the correspondence, the Vietnam correspondence, and the advent of leaving your television on to see the horrors of Vietnam. You watch body bags and caskets come home. That really affected people, seeing that. And then, of course, a few years earlier, when you saw the confrontations between Southerners and freedom fighters in the South, where hoses are turned on people and clothes are being ripped from their bodies and dogs are tearing the flesh off of children, that made the citizenry say, okay, wait, what the hell is our government doing? For us, what are they doing for us? So I think that it was weakening. Their institutional prowess was weakening.
And then to segue into the aftermath of all these assassinations, of these political movements dissolving. I know we didn't talk about the Panthers much, but I've listened to some programs where you're talking about them before. And kind of this popular narrative with a lot of the African-American community to this day is that after you have the end of the Panthers pretty much, which people attribute to most of that rank and file then becoming what would become those first Crip and Blood gang members, and the drugs being funneled into the inner cities, and this new rugged individualism replacing this kind of socialistic revolutionary culture that existed before. Do you think, and it's, the narrative with a lot of African American community is that this is some kind of, planned out master plan. What do you think about that kind of narrative? Do you think that the drugs and were I know there is some documentation with some of the police departments and some of the feds in, like, I know New York in particular in places, but do you think there was a organized effort to do that?
Look, it's not something that I have studied extensively. I know other people have, like you said, you've seen documents, or at least you've read books or read articles that address this. But knowing what I know about our intelligence agencies, knowing what I know about what they will do, the lengths they will go to for their very own survival. And if you have a politically conscious public, then you're not going to be able to get away with a whole lot that you want to get away with. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
if everyone is Noam Chomsky, we can't have wars all over the fucking globe. You know what I mean? So how do we prevent people from becoming Noam Chomskys? Well, you put them in slums, you put them in ghettos, and you call them ghettos, right? You make higher education harder and harder to get to. And then, of course, you chain people to a dependency on either, like you said, drugs or violence, or you won't be able to get anywhere on your own. You have no identity on your own. So the only way you're going to actually feel like you belong to something or something that's worthy is by becoming a member of a gang. So it is completely within the realm of possibility that a very strategic plan of action includes things like allowing drugs to come in to cities, not enforcing the law quite as strenuously to keep people docile, to keep them stupid, to keep them like I said, dependent on something other than empathy or progress or anything like that. So, yeah, I absolutely think that it's possible.
Well, thanks.
That it's likely. How's that?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Look, our criticism now, back in the 80s, I'm sorry, just to finish off the thought like this. Back in the 80s when it was asserted that cocaine was being allowed to just infiltrate inner cities, right? Around the same time that it was also suggested that AIDS, which was probably a laboratory created virus, was created for the exact same reason. But today's version of that would be the pharmaceutical companies. How much criticism has been leveled against the pharmaceutical companies for not only their huge profits, but making people dependent on drugs.
Yeah.
To either alter their mood, their consciousness, their will to live. I mean, and that kind of thing. So now we have the opioid crisis as well. But that started with, all of the criticisms being laid against big pharma and its control of what people feel they need, right? So do we feel that we need activism like we did back in the 1960s? Well, no, even though we are still just as divided. But with the advent of a politician, if you can call him that, like Trump, you absolutely, I think, are going to find remnants of the 1960s, and you already have seen it. And even the kind of casualties that take place when police go up against the citizenry. We've seen that too.
Yep.
We've seen how what the very circumstances that gave birth to an organization like the Black Panther Party back in the 1960s, those elements are still with us today, just as strong. And
it hasn't gone away.
It's not going away. In fact, it's coming back. It's coming back with a vengeance. So it was a great. I can't remember who I just heard talking about. Mulaney, the comedian. What's his first name?
John
Mulaney. His latest Netflix special is he was talking about, and we have Nazis again. Where the hell did that come from? You know what I mean? I mean, the last reference of organized Nazis that I saw was the Blues Brothers back in 1980 when he said, Illinois Nazis, I hate Illinois Nazis, and then they drive them off the bridge. I mean, why the hell are we reverting back? We're recessing. We're not progressing.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why is that? And all of these social ills and all of these, like you said, all of this recognition and understanding of what's happening behind the scenes and with corporations and governments and so forth and so on. People are slowly waking up from that stupor, and hopefully with shows like yours and research that's being done and discussed and issues that are being discussed on a regular basis, hopefully that will spark something. Hopefully that will generate a movement to break some of these shackles. So we can always hope.
Let's hope so. Let's definitely hope so. Let's hope nobody. But sometimes I fear in the conspiracy community that they are really focused on the wrong things.
Well,
absolutely. Why you are even suggesting that the mass murder of school children is a hoax is beyond me.
Right.
That's not where you put your doubt of things. But.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. We have to be really careful because there's a line somewhere. It's a big gray area, but Discord, and disinformation and stuff is used as a platform to increase power in a lot of ways, and we have to be careful that we're trying to help expose truth and spread awareness and spread just enough doubt that people question everything, but not
right.
But we're not promoting this disinformation kind of campaign that is also dividing us at the same time, and it's a tricky line.
Oh, absolutely. And look, there have been one of the reasons why I became a little disinfected with the JFK community is because of all the backstabbing, because of all of the snarky, inter-community either accusations or name calling or even outright bullying. Look, aren't we supposed to be a community? Aren't we supposed to do this together? If you've got information, share it. If this information sucks, say it. Let's have it out but let's be productive about it, because the divide and conquer method, which again I
age
said
old,
before that Hoover loved to use. That there's already consternation. If you turn up the heat even more, which I fear is where we are right now. So there's already distrust. There's already, the divisions of the camps of right and left and conservative and liberal and Democrat and Republican and so forth and so on. But now it's been ratcheted up because of this, this lame ass who's in the White House. That we can't even see facts. We can't even recognize facts or acknowledge that they exist. You know what I mean? Right. So especially on the conspiracy or even paranormal or subcultures, I don't know. We have to do it right, and we have to do it intelligently and reasonably, but of course, the most important is consistently. We've got to be consistent with how we go about it and how we criticize and how we actually try to approach the truth. And go from there. Because we cannot question everything. Adam, is your name really Adam? I want to see your birth certificate.
He was born in Kenya.
Right. Yeah.
Are we really on the air in the United States, or are we broadcasting in some some other galaxy?
It's a Russian troll factory.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Am I talking to Putin right now? I mean, come on.
You never know. You could be. Well, Craig, this has been very enlightening. This has been a marathon too. We're almost gone like 2 hours here. So
it's the wonders of editing. You can certainly edit this down to.
I don't think we need to.
No, it's going to be straight.
Because it would be some hardcore listeners that want to hear me talk for 2 hours. So
I do. Before we let you go, though, I want to reiterate something, sort of a thematic thing that you mentioned towards the beginning when you were talking about this, the new documentary. Just basically that if you have a respect for these people, you have to also respect the fact that their deaths might not have been what you're being told, might not have, you know, been completely kind of in vain, random sort of circumstantial things. And that if you respect who they are, you've got to look a little bit more into how that all went down, because that's a big part of who they are and their legacy and what they could potentially leave us with. So,
well, yeah, and what they gave their life for.
Exactly.
I mean, they laid down their life for this stuff. Because if they were just, you know, you and me, they'd still be alive. But they put themselves out there, and they put everything that they had on the line for the betterment of human beings, from of the human race. And I think about that as you just said that. I think about you know, the arguments that we can't talk about gun control after a tragedy, because you know, you don't belittle or besmirch the memories of the people, the victims, by politicizing it, right? Like as if demanding answers, transparency, the wheels of justice turning, as if that is somehow demeaning, as if that is somehow you know, counterintuitive, or would somehow, you know, desecrate their memories. Are you kidding me? Every one of those victims of 9/11. Well, okay, it's a little lofty to say that, but I'm saying, I would say that a vast majority of, certainly their families, feel that their deaths should not have been in vain. Okay, we got bones still being picked off of the roofs in downtown Manhattan. All right, these are people that gave their lives for they didn't even know why. But the worst thing that we can do for their memories is to shut up about it, is to just say, oh, really? Buildings can collapse on on each other just from fire? Okay. Yeah, that's fine. That sounds good.
Agreed.
Yeah.
We need to do a show about that too.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, 9/11 is next, right? Well,
it should be.
I've always told my daughters that is their generation's JFK assassination.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is.
Yep. Well, I'll remember where we were when that happened.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your generosity, and thank you so much to your listeners for the same thing.
Hey, thank you so much.
Always a pleasure to speak to you.
Where can people find you on the online, Craig?
Well, I don't really have access to any writings or anything like that. I really should do that, but I've just either been intimidated by technology or just too lazy to do it. But yeah, I'm on Facebook. That's about as public as I get.
Well, tell everyone about that schematic map that you got.
Well, the because it's been said that the JFK assassination has garnered 2,500 books. The last thing I wanted to do was to write yet another book. So my contribution to the JFK case was to create a database of all of the witnesses to his assassination. So I, with an architect friend of mine, did a plot of Dealey Plaza. It's like a 24 by 36 map of Dealey Plaza where Kennedy was assassinated. And I plotted all of the witnesses that I could find, having gone through all the FBI, the Dallas police, the Dallas sheriffs, State Department documents. I found as many witnesses as I could. I plotted them where they were at the time of the shots, and then published like a book that goes along with that map that gives more detail than I could put on a map. Because the last thing I wanted to do was to muddle a map,
right,
and just make it so busy. And so, so here's a nice clean map that just shows you where everyone is. But if you want to know the particulars about that person, then you need to look into the book that goes along with it. So that's my schematic and book of JFK assassination witnesses.
Cool.
Yeah, we want to,
and that you can. I forgot that I have a WordPress. So I think, if I remember correctly, it's craigciccone.wordpress.com.
We want to put that map in the studio.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, absolutely. I'll send you one.
Oh, awesome. Oh, cool. I'll send you the address. Yeah, we want that. Awesome. Well, thank you, Craig, so much.
I'm a substitute teacher, and one of the permanent teachers at the school where I teach. He's a history teacher, and he was nice enough to buy one of my schematics, laminate it, and put it in his classroom. So that's the whole point of doing this. So I'll be happy to do it. I'll be proud to have my work
hang
in your man cave.
Well, stay on the line for us, Craig. We're going to close out this section. And guys, it's been a marathon, so we're going to come back, albeit a little bit briefly, on Conspirinormal.
So I try not to bring up local issues too much because most of our listenership is not local,
Yes.
you know, but
Yes.
Nashville has a serious transportation problem. This morning there was an accident on the freeway near us, which meant everyone was routed to my little
It
side road
wasn't
that I was
just an
taking.
accident. There was a dead body on the Interstate 40.
Yeah, there was So the entire interstate was shut down, and everyone got routed to my route.
They had to do an investigation.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got stuck in traffic for 2.5 hours today on the way to work. But the silver lining is I got to listen to 5 episodes of one of my favorite podcasts, which is the 13 O'Clock podcast
Oh, nice.
with Tom and Jenny.
5 episodes?
Well, I'm backtracking on their movie reviews because they just recently released all those.
I got it. Those
So-
are like 20 minutes long.
Yeah, so
okay.
I caught up on all of
All
those,
right.
which are awesome.
Yeah.
And if you like podcasts and you like our show, go check out their show because it is great. And yeah,
And in a couple of episodes,
they're gonna be
they're
here
going to
joining
be
us.
back on.
So, nice segue, Adam.
Thank you. I was like, I need to get them back on because they've had a bunch of episodes since we talked to them back in August, and we can also talk movies too.
Yeah, we can.
Like that was the show that Rob and I listened to mostly pretty much all the way to Roswell and then back again. Was 13 O'Clock podcast.
Yep.
Starting with the necrophilia episode.
Which is great. Tom, and that's the thing, that the way they play off each other is so great. Like, you know, Jenny is so like fact based, and Tom will take these tangents all the time and just run with them, and it's just,
Right. I love it.
You can almost hear like the gears like grinding in his head, like as he's analyzing stuff.
Well, interesting thing, they did an episode about the East Area rapist.
Mm-hmm.
Remember? And that guy was actually caught
Yeah.
last week.
Yep.
And
California.
in California, yeah. The last murder that he had
police
committed,
officer, by
yeah,
the
he
way.
was a police officer. Mm-hmm. The last murder that he committed was in 1986. And before that, I believe that he had like this reign of terror from like 74 to like 81 or something like that. But all throughout the 70s. And he was considered the original Night Stalker, not to be confused with Richard Ramirez, who became the Night Stalker. But this was the original. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody had any clue. But there was like Joe was saying, there was speculation that the guy had to be a policeman.
It took
Because-
32 years.
Yeah.
And he was at some point, right?
Yeah, he had been a policeman at some point because people were saying and they even talked about that in that episode, Tom and Jenny on 13 O'Clock. They talked about that he had to have been someone that knew the area, someone that was there most of the time and had an observance of these people. So he's probably a cop sitting in his car in that area watching people.
Yep, just casing it
And
out.
they had some kind of, I can't remember what it was, but there was something about how they caught him that had to do with a DNA profile that I guess had been one of those, like, I don't know, was it a 23andMe? Yeah. So you know more.
They used a family member's DNA from them using Ancestry.com
Oh, wow.
to confirm it was him,
Oh, okay.
which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Database.
There's already been a few warrants on Ancestry.com and National Geographic, I think. And
Really?
yeah, It's very unfortunate because I really want to do it, and my sister actually already bought me the kit and everything, and I'm just.
What are you trying to say?
It's not unfortunate unless you're a serial killer, Seville.
They might catch me. I don't know.
No, I just mean like if anyone,
Or your relative is.
if any relative of mine ever does anything bad, I'm gonna be like the snitch, you know.
Oh, okay. I gotcha. All right. Yeah. Sorry, Uncle Walter. Sorry you got caught for all those rapes that you did back in the day. No. Good Lord. But that is kind of interesting that there's been some kind of criticism about the whole 23andMe stuff and the Ancestry.com.
Yeah.
That they're actually building a database.
Yeah.
Well, that's
more on the conspiratorial side.
Yeah, but that's how things are going to go. Where there's no avoiding that. You know,
It's actually a new.
our phones are going to listen to everything we say. Facebook is going to like blast ads at you for what you talk about. Like,
yeah, but DNA sampling is a little,
23andMe is going to
it's really invasive.
It is. But anything you do online is going to be profiled. Like, that's all I'm saying. Like, there's no avoiding that, and it's just part of our culture.
Yeah, it's moving all to artificial intelligence. Like they want everything to be on record, you know, and to be analyzed. And they actually can predict the future with some of this stuff.
Oh yeah, there's totally like Silicon Valley guys that are building mega supercomputers that we can't even imagine that are gonna. You know, the predictive abilities are ridiculous.
Elon Musk is going to take over the world. I'm telling you.
Elon Musk is one of the good guys over there.
Oh, okay.
This is the guys we don't know about that we need to worry about over there.
He's your guy.
He is my guy. I have faith in that guy.
He's your evil robot overlord.
That's the transit system I want. He's building. I want to cross the country.
That's what I'm saying. I will.
You know?
I will proudly serve Elon Musk's robot overlords.
You heard it here, folks. You heard it here.
The views of Rob do not reflect.
Which, by the way, what Joe is talking about, the transit system, that's another local Nashville thing. Apparently today, May 1st, they voted on. I did not vote because I was confused about what to even vote for. But
I live in the wrong
transit.
county. Vote,
yeah, you live outside of the county. So you can't vote. You couldn't vote. I think all they were voting on was just this referendum, right, on the transit system.
Well, the way I understand it, they wanted to build a tunnel because every hip city needs to have a tunnel, and it was going to only affect downtown, where everybody either rents a bike or walks or takes Uber.
Yeah,
and all the traffic issues that we have are people that commute to town to work every day and back, and it didn't even address that.
Right. And we have a transit train. It's not much of anything, but we do have one.
No, it's been a failing system since it started. It can't support. Yeah. If everybody decided to jump on that, it would be so overloaded and just.
Have you been on it? It is actually full every day.
The X-Star?
Right.
Yeah. No.
So I think people are using it, but they need like 7 more trains.
Right.
Yeah. Agreed. I mean, Nashville is growing, and it's growing exponentially still.
Uh-huh.
And people are moving here every day.
The entertainment's out of control, too.
They don't want to do. I mean, even Atlanta has a better transit system, and Atlanta's is not the best. But what Nashville government was proposing wasn't even going to go past a little area we call Briley Parkway that pretty much like circles the city.
Right.
So in the outer parts of the county, like where we are in Nashville, we're east of Nashville, it wasn't even really going to come out here. And so it's not really going to benefit anybody in the greater county area of Davidson County. It would just benefit people inside that loop. But people's property values or property taxes were going to go sky high if this thing was going to be built.
Right.
Yeah, so
a lot of people
who aren't
weren't
using
happy
it
about
have
it.
to pay for it.
Exactly. Yeah. The people that are still having to drive into work every day, nothing's going to change for them. But if you own a home in Metro Davidson, Nashville, you're not going to.
Sales tax was going to go up too.
Yep. So people were definitely not happy about it. So they really needed to come up with a better comprehensive plan and they just didn't. That's kind of in my opinion. What do you think, Zerfiel? Because you live a little closer in.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrible. We need something, but
Like horses.
yeah. I mean,
More
we
bicycle
need
paths.
we need something, but as far as the funding and the way they wanted to get the revenue, it just seemed like it was kind of putting it all on the the people at the bottom, and I really didn't think that was right, especially with how much growth, how much people are profiting from the growth of Nashville, and they want us to pay for it at the grocery store and people's property, but whatever. I don't know. I didn't get too involved.
Yeah, because you work in construction, and there's more and more construction every day.
Yeah, I mean,
in this
we've
city.
got to figure something out, but also at the same time, it's like this is just pushed like, oh, this is the last chance to even talk about it or do anything, and this is, and it's like, come on, we don't have a lot of time. We have a major problem right now, but this doesn't mean we can't come up with something in the next year, in the next 2 years, and it's still something has to be done.
Right.
Will be done.
Right. It's got to be a way to include, because it's not just.
It felt
Davidson
rushed,
County.
but we have we're really, really pro-business, pro-development, and even though the political makeup is seemingly liberal, we're still Tennessee, and, they have a hard time getting revenue and proposing revenue, especially on big business, and, it's hard for them to come up with the money to do things because we're not a place like, an Atlanta or Los Angeles or New York,
I was thinking a cool thing they haven't even looked at is the river system. Put some barges down there and tell people to get on the river and go right into downtown. It would be so fun. And, where is that? They used to have that, right, in the 40s, right? Called Stewart's Ferry and stuff, right? But they don't cart people around on the boat anymore. I don't know. I was thinking that would be fun.
Maybe that was considered too slow. I don't know. That's a possibility.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. It's another issue that I don't have an answer for, but I don't think that what they proposed was an answer either. So,
right. Yeah, exactly. It just seemed really, really half-assed.
All I know is that all the
rushed.
people that are moving to Nashville and buying $400,000 condos are not going to work my job. So there's got to be got to be a way for me to get there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you know what it does, though? It's not a bad thing. It makes the city spread out more. You're not going to put a big you're not going to you possibly, if you are an employer, you wouldn't put your center of business in the middle of the city because it's too hard to get there. So then you spread out. You put a big building on the outskirts of the city. Then create a whole new center. So I don't think our traffic problem is necessarily a bad thing. It just shows that we're a popular city.
Yeah, it'll find a balancing point for sure, but we're experiencing some serious growing pains right now.
Yeah, maybe some other city will start taking the lead, or blunt it.
You have a good excuse by showing up late to work, at least.
Yeah. If someone's dead on the interstate,
You listen to a lot of podcasts on your way to work anyway.
you can do that.
Put on that Conspirinormal, catch up.
That's exactly. And when you're sitting in Nashville traffic or whatever traffic you're sitting in, make sure you choose Conspirinormal as a podcast of choice. Joe, you have your little technology here. Just tell people about it. You were monitoring the conversation.
Yeah, we're analyzing the light patterns in the room. Supposedly hooked to something we're calling the field, but it is a future. We're calling it Pocket Future now. It'll be available for the normal person to use. We're hoping it helps with, I don't know, an unknown kind of, it's more paranormal, but something is bringing these words on the screen, and it's like the change of light in the room is doing it. So we were analyzing the Kennedy stuff, and it was, I would see the words come up I saw the word Kennedy come up, and I saw the word gun sight, and
Really?
yep. Also saw
I also saw the word cunnilingus come up once. just saying.
I think sometimes it's referring to things like how bad these guys were. He was talking about the FBI guy being sexually promiscuous and stuff.
Yeah,
and
there was a lot of talk about that.
Yeah, stuff like that. It just triggers. I don't know.
I think fellatio would have been J. Edgar Hoover's word.
This program is not listening to us at all. It's just purely analyzing variations in
ambience
light.
in the room. Yeah.
Yeah, it may be listening.
There was
though.
some weird synchronistic stuff, though.
But the light is kind of low because of the squirrel.
Right. Whatever is causing the effect might be listening, but I mean, your phone is not listening to our conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
It's. I still don't even know how to define it. I think it's more. It's just spirits, possibly spirits, like other people in the room listening and then putting their comments in.
Their bereavements is what it says.
Yeah,
That they're not very happy.
Is it still going?
Yeah, it's very convoluted. Very.
That's my answer.
Whoever
It's
Janela
convoluted.
is,
My
it's
answer.
very
Who's
convoluted.
Janela, yeah.
But yeah,
Lots of numbers too.
Yeah, the numbers are. I've seen it. When he said the shot for JFK Jr. was at 12 o'clock, the number 11 and 12 came up. So it was like it knew the time. It said 11, 12. So sometimes the numbers make sense, and sometimes you have to kind of think about it when a number comes up. But it is.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, where can people find this?
It's not found yet on the internet. So
What?
So there's going to be another podcast, hopefully, and with Adam and Conspirinormal, and we're going to do a book on it, and then it should be ready for the public to get. But right now, it's just a prototype.
All right. Well, excellent. All right. Well, next week we got an interesting show. I have it scheduled of Solaris Blue Raven coming on, and she has experienced mind control in her life, and some really interesting and strange, convoluted things that have to deal with the band Rush.
Really?
I'll just put it that way.
Nice. This is like Project Camellia stuff?
It is very similar to Camellia, yes. So, all right. Well, I think that's it, guys.
Did you want to talk about the TBN people?
Oh, yeah.
You want to save it for next?
Yeah, we'll save that for next time.
Okay.
Let's save that for next time because this show's gone on a little longer than I thought it was going to, but that is very strange. But yeah, we'll talk about that next time. Just remind me. So guys, thank you so much. And Rob, tell them where they can find our Patreon. Not that we have anything really up lately on Patreon.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. We got tons of content up there.
Tons.
If you want to support the show, go to patreon.com/conspirinormal. We've got bonus episodes and we got bonus wallpapers and we've still got some t-shirts. We're going to get some more. Depending on the tier, you can subscribe there. If you don't want a monthly subscription because you don't want a monthly bill that you're not prepared for, I totally understand because I'm the same way. And you still want to support the show monetarily, you can go to our website at conspirinormal.com, and there's a link to make a one-time donation there. If you want to support the show because you like us, but you don't want to spend any money, also totally get that. You can go to wherever you listen to podcasts at iTunes or Stitcher or whatever, and just give us a nice 5-star review because we really love those. And we love all of you. We love our Patreons. We love our listeners. So thank you so much, everybody.
Help us buy cigars.
Help me fix the studio. The squirrels have destroyed it.
All right, guys. We'll see you next week on Conspirinormal. Damn squirrels.
Damn squirrels.